This is a wonderful turnout, and it fills my heart to see everybody here. My name is Sarah. I'm the library director here at the Loomis Library. And this program tonight is kicking off a month-long series of events. We're calling it A Month of Remembrance. Originally, we had planned to have this series in February. However, because of COVID, we were forced to postpone. But here we are in May, finally able to make it happen. So we're very excited. We had planned to have this series, like I said, in February, and that is because February 19, 2022 was the 80th anniversary of the signing of Executive Order 9066, an order which unjustly incarcerated approximately 120,000 Japanese Americans in 7 different internment camps between 1942 and 1945. Because of the large fruit industry in this area, in the Loomis Basin, many of Placer County's 1,800 Japanese citizens were concentrated in this area. And when Order 9066 came down, Loomis and its surrounding areas lost a significant number of neighbors and friends. And that's not to mention the incarcerated community members themselves, who were forced to give up homes, heirlooms, thriving businesses, pets, and their dignity to be evacuated to these camps. Before I introduce tonight's first speaker, I would like to let you know what other events we have. We do have flyers out there. I hope you all got one. If you didn't, you can grab one on the way out. But this upcoming Saturday, from 10 to 5, in this room, we will have a display of artifacts from our various Japanese American community members, showcasing their families' histories, their families' heirlooms, and all sorts of wonderful items that are related to their Japanese American history and ancestry. On Tuesday, May 12th, once again in this room at 5:30, we will be showing the film Newcastle Gem of the Foothills, a PBS documentary, which I'm sure I've heard from you guys. Many of you have already seen. However, we will also be having a Q&A after the fact with Ed Horton and Barbara Leake, who are community members whose families have lived in this area for generations. And what I liked about that film was that it really showcased the diversity of this area before the war, and I think that's a really important history to showcase. On Wednesday, May 18th at 5:30, we are going to have a teen book discussion on The Things They Carried by George Takei, and we're going to have special guest Fusai Miyamoto at that so that they can hear her story, because she was incarcerated in Tule Lake, I believe, and as a child. And so that will add some good color for that. On Thursday, May 19th at 5:30, we're going to have a book discussion about the book Facing the Mountain by Daniel James Brown. And we will have a special guest, Stu Kageta, whose father Frank was in the all-Japanese 442nd Regiment. So once again, add some color to the book discussion and a little bit of extra information there. On Thursday, May 26th, we will end the series with an oral history panel at the Blue Goose. It will not be here. And this panel will feature community members who both lived through the time and who are there to give their thoughts and impressions, both of being interned and also some of being left behind, those who were here and were Caucasian during that time and what that experience was like as well. I want to thank our committee. It was a wonderful committee. It was a large committee, and we've been meeting for almost a year now to bring these events to fruition, and I could not have done any of this without their help. So I really want to drive home that this was a group effort, and I appreciate everyone on that committee. Back to tonight's program. Tonight we're going to have 2 presenters. David Unruhe is here to speak about his book, Japan Towns of Placer County, to give us a historical perspective of the area. And then Rebecca Gregg will present after with a slideshow of various landmarks that highlight this history today. So without further ado, David Unruhe is retired from the California Teachers Association. He considers himself to be an amateur historian and geographer. He received a grant from the California Civil Liberties Project to write his book, The Japan Towns of Placer County. David.
men throughout the room that probably know more about this stuff than I do. So if I say something that's really out of line, call me on it. So, and that's also what I want to say is that unlike most speakers, I encourage you to ask questions during the program. Don't wait till the end. So if something sparks a thought and you ask it at the time, I'd be happy to answer it. And also, I don't have a PowerPoint or anything like that because I've had bad experiences coming to a group like this with a PowerPoint and it just going kablooey. So enough. First of all, I'm assuming most everybody are Placer County natives, or not. I moved here 30 years ago. I had no idea there was even a Japanese community in Placer County. And then I found out about this community in Penryn, which was, at that time, it didn't even exist anymore. But most of the buildings were still standing up. So that got me interested. Can everybody hear me? No? Okay. I'll try and talk louder. This is not a story about internment camps. I think everybody, at least in this room, knows a little bit about the internment camps, and this is not a story about it. But if you're talking about Japanese American history, you have to at least touch upon that, because that is the main event in Japanese American history. So that basically split the timeline of the Japantowns in half. There was pre-war, there was internment, and then there was post-war. So, okay, so why is there a Japanese community in Placer County? Fruit? Yeah, exactly. It was, first of all, there were two ethnic groups that came prior to the Japanese. There were the Chinese and the English. Hence, we have English colony. So I think everybody knows that the Chinese came and helped build the railroads, right? And then when they were done with all of that hard work, we didn't need them anymore. So we passed the Chinese Exclusion Act, and we didn't let any more in, and some of them we kicked them out. We kicked them out of their Chinatowns and whatever. So the Chinese were left. We still needed their labor, so for the railroads and for the fruit orchards. So the Japanese were brought in, and they were considered less objectionable than the Chinese. So whenever they would settle in a place like Loomis or Penryn or Newcastle or Auburn, they usually would have to live in the previous Chinatown, where the Chinatown existed, because all of those towns, yes.
You said they brought in the Japanese?
The
Japanese came by themselves.
The Japanese came in,
right?
Right, that's correct, yes.
That's
Yeah, see, that's perfect. See, follow that example, okay? So they needed the labor. The railroads actually hired a lot of Japanese. They didn't do the building of the railroads, but they did the maintenance of the railroads. So all of these towns along here, along the Union Pacific, Loomis, Penryn, Newcastle, Auburn, were built along the tracks. And then that also made it easier to ship the fruit back east, because this Placer County was the #1 fruit growing county in the United States, or exporting to the back east. And it was mostly stone fruit, like peaches, pears, and plums. So, and another reason why here is because the English came, built the ditch system. Actually, they hired the Chinese to build the ditch system for the English colony that never really transpired. So the Japanese came in. They had these water systems to irrigate the fields, which was mostly orchards. And the proximity to the railroad, they would ship the fruit back east. So Loomis, Penryn, Newcastle, Auburn, they all had Chinatowns, which were kind of withering away. The Japanese came in, basically built their Japantowns over the Chinatowns. The one exception was here in Loomis, which old timers would tell me, I'm not aware of there being a Chinatown in Loomis.
Yeah, we owned it. Yeah, on King Road.
Okay, well, as I understand, there was a Chinatown about where the freeway is. Is that correct?
Just a little east.
Yeah, okay, and that was wiped out a long time ago. But for the most part, the Japantowns existed where the previous Chinatowns were.
So why were Japanese considered more desirable than Chinese?
That's a very good question, and I'm not sure I'm good enough to answer that question. But for the most part, the Chinese that came earlier were really peasants with very little skills other than their ability to work hard. And so they came and they were abused basically by the railroad workers. The Japanese weren't, as I said, they were only considered mildly less objectionable than the Chinese. So, yeah, it could be. Can you still not hear me? I'll try. So, oh, okay. And the other thing I wanted to talk about was the generations, because the Japanese Americans, there's Susie Goto. Hi, Susie. More than any other ethnic group in the United States, the Japanese tend to classify themselves by their generation in this country. And that's due to historical and cultural background. So the first ones that came were the Issei. They were born in Japan, and they came here. Basically, that was approximately 1900 or so. They were born in the late 1800s. Japan was changing at that time. Most of the single men who came were the number 2 or number 3 in their family. So they had no future in Japan, because number 1 son got everything. So they came here by themselves, and the idea was they were going to make a fortune and go home. Well, it didn't happen. They stuck around, worked, saved their money. A lot of times they were able to, instead of just working the land, they were able to buy the land. So after they decided to stay, then they would go send back to Japan for a wife. The wife would come over, and they would start a family. And so the peak years for starting the families were approximately 1915 to 1925. And then the peak years for the children were in the middle of that time period. So 23, 24, 25 is when most of the Nisei, the second generation, were born. So, yes?
So you make a statement they would send back for wives?
Yes.
Would that be young ladies that they had known back home?
No. It was either their family in Japan had arranged for their wedding, which was pretty common back then, but they had this also thing called picture brides, where they would the only thing they would know about them, the man and the woman would exchange photographs. That's how they would meet. So when the woman arrived, she was expecting this young handsome bachelor. And that picture was 10 years old. So there was quite a cultural awakening at that moment. But anyway, yeah, thank you. So if you think about the time periods I'm talking about, most of the Nisei started being born around 1920, 21, 22. The peak years for their being born were 23, 24, 25. So if you add 18 years to that, that means that their peak years of graduating from high school were 1941, 1942, 1943. So that coincides directly with the war. I said I wasn't going to talk about the war internment, but I have to a little bit. So all of those towns, well, back then there were only 3 high schools in the county. There was Placer High School in Auburn, Roseville High School, and Lincoln High School. There was no Del Oro. Those were the good old days, no Del Oro. So the Japanese population in Auburn in the early 40s was so large that in 1941, the Placer High School class of 41 was almost 1/3 Japanese American. In 1942, the class was 0 because they were all gone. So, after the internment process started, and people were shipped either to Arboga out near Marysville or to Tule Lake, there was one Japanese American left in Placer County, and you all know him. He's pretty famous. Is Pat Morita, the actor Pat Morita. Pat Morita had tuberculosis, and he was in the sanitarium in Weimar, and they determined that he was not able to be shipped to the internment camp. So he stayed in Weimar. He did eventually go on to Tule Lake. But Pat Morita was the only Japanese American in Placer County. I bet even Ed didn't know that.
No comment.
So getting back to the Japan towns, okay? So even Roseville was a railroad town, and there were a lot of Japanese that worked for the railroad. There was not a Japan town per se in Roseville. I'm not sure why, but maybe because it wasn't in proximity to the farms. But there were some Japanese American businesses in Roseville. Old Town Roseville had 2 Japanese markets, Iwasaki Market and Hayashi. And if you go to Old Town Roseville, the Roundhouse Deli, that was the Iwasaki Market. You know, Ken was like, yes.
What was it?
The Roundhouse Deli?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, right on Church Street.
Right across
Yeah,
the road.
right across from the railroad. There's a reason it was right there.
Yeah.
From my research, the towns of Rockland and Lincoln never had a Japantown. Rockland didn't, for some reason, either there were farmers on the outskirts of Rockland, but I have never found any Japantown residents or businesses in Rockland. But Loomis did. The Japantown basically was the intersection of right here, Horseshoe Bar and Taylor Road. That's where Igarashi's, Takahashi's, and Takagishis. And I'm saying it by the name of the owner. Didn't matter what the name of the company was. It could have been Loomis Mercantile. Everybody called it Takahashi's. Everybody called it Takahashi's. Takagishis. And what was the third one I said? Igarashi's, yes. And that changed when, because I guess people didn't want to say Takamoto's, so it became Main Drag. They called it Main Drag. They called Main Drag Main Drag.
After the war.
After the war, yes.
We always called it ducks.
So that was the Loomis Japantown. But basically, the main Japantown in Placer County was Penryn. There actually was a downtown Penryn. Along the railroad tracks was a downtown Penryn. Japantown was farther east, along Upper Penryn Road. Is anybody? Are you familiar with the area? Okay. That's right. Some people went to Penryn Elementary School.
I did.
So, Valencia Club, everybody knows Valencia. Valencia Club started off as the Hilltop Market, Hilltop Restaurant. And then across the street from that was the gas station, where the current deli is. That was Howard Nakai's gas station. Later on, I'm not sure when, but it became Yokota's gas station, isn't that correct?
This was next door. This was a signal. gas
Okay.
station next to the Lynching Club.
Okay.
Jack and his wife lived in a trailer there when they came back from camp.
Okay. So there were actually 2 gas stations there?
There's a Ridgefield on top of the hill also.
Yeah,
Bob
okay.
Jacobson.
Okay. Also, you guys probably know this, but the Bel Air markets started in Penryn. It started by the Wong family in their basement, and they started growing bean sprouts, and that became Bel Air Market.
Wow.
Isn't that amazing? So, Penryn, as I said, everybody called the businesses by the name of the family. So Penryn, we had the Valencia Club, Hilltop Market, 2 gas stations on the corner, and then 1 block over Penryn Road, we had Godos. We have a Godo here. We have 2 Godos here. The Godos Dairiki. We have a Dairiki in the room too. Yamada, Nishimoto's, Mikawa, and Mikawa building is still there. It's actually been remodeled. There was in addition to the 2 gas stations, there was a garage, the K&M garage, Kubo and Matsuda. There was the Pastime Bar. There was a pool hall, drinking establishment, and a little bit of illegal gambling. There was a dentist, a barber, and a Buddhist church. And farther east, you had the town of Newcastle. Newcastle had a Japantown too. It's completely gone. It was basically where the railroad overpass over the freeway is. That was Japantown and Chinatown.
Oh, wow.
When they decided to put the freeway through, this was a thought process from Caltrans. They called it Caltrans at the time. They would seize the property from eminent domain. They would take the path of least resistance, which meant go through the Chinese community. So that's exactly what they did. The Chinese couldn't object to it. So of all of the Japantowns, I know the least about Newcastle because it really doesn't exist. Maybe it will address it in the movie about Newcastle. I'm not sure. But also, if you know Ken Tokutomi, their family ranch was on where the Valero gas station is now. So they just barely missed getting wiped out by the freeway. And then farther east is the town of Auburn, which also had Japantown on top of the Chinatown. So Old Town Auburn is where the Chinatown, Japantown was. I think everybody knows where Shanghai Restaurant and Bar is, which is now Auburn Ale House. Across the street was Suda Market, which became the Buddhist Church of Auburn. And then when it became the Buddhist Church of Auburn, Suda's moved storefronts down to the right. And Suda Market lasted until 2006. And the family still owns the building. Dorothy Suda Fuji is still alive at 100 and still driving. There was also, as I mentioned, the Shanghai Restaurant and Bar, and the owner of Shanghai was a man named Charlie Yu, and he was a character. There was a lot of discrimination against Chinese, but Charlie Yu didn't take it, and he stood up to the police, and he had a lot of respect. And he also had, you've heard the expression, liquor in the front and poker in the rear. That's exactly what Shanghai was. He had a little bit of illegal gambling going on there too. So I've talked about the merchants in these towns. The other institution that's important to talk about are the churches. So Loomis, as everybody knows, Loomis was considered a Christian town because of the Loomis Methodist Church, which is way out in the country. It was number one, they had the land was donated to the church, and they wanted to be out of the town, so they were way out there, way out on Grace Road. Penryn, where the Buddhist church was, Penryn was considered the Buddhist town as compared to the Christian town of Loomis. That is, in my opinion, that's one of the reasons why the relationships always seem to be better in Loomis than Penryn or Auburn or Newcastle. Most of the Japanese in Penryn, since Penryn was its own self-contained community, they didn't have to interact too much with the Caucasians. They had everything they needed right there in Penryn. But Loomis, Newcastle, and Auburn was different. They had to interact. And so the relationships weren't always as good, especially in Auburn. People will tell you, especially in Auburn, the relationships were pretty bad. And so Penryn had the Buddhist church, and then Auburn also had a Buddhist church in Old Town. And the Auburn Buddhist church never reopened after the war. One of the things I find interesting is that both Buddhist churches in Penryn and in Auburn ran on the weekends, on Saturdays, they ran Japanese language schools for the children. The children who were born here, the parents wanted them to speak Japanese. The Loomis Methodist Church had classes to teach the kids English. So I just find that interesting. So yes.
What was the determining factor of which immigrants and Japanese American would become Christians and Methodists, and which would be Buddhists?
Well, one of the determining factors was actually where you lived, but some of the Japanese that came to the Loomis area had already been converted to Christianity in Japan, so they came here with that already within them. And then, like as I said, a lot of it depended on where you lived. If you lived in Loomis, you weren't going to go all the way to Penryn for church. You would come to the church in Loomis. Penryn, although there was actually a Methodist church in Penryn, almost all the Japanese in Penryn belonged to the Buddhist church. And then, as I said, in Auburn, they had a separate Buddhist church. Most of those people became members of the Penryn Buddhist church. Okay, so I am getting the high sign. Are there any other questions? Yes.
Where was the church in Auburn?
Where Suda's Market was, which is now called the Bistro, was the Buddhist church, and Suda's was 3 storefronts to the right. So basically, right there, right in the heart of Old Town, Auburn.
Just a comment, the Loomis Methodist Church has a really nice Japanese garden, and the Buddhist church in Penryn has I haven't been to that one yet, but I've heard they've got a great koi pond. It's all the Japanese influence in both of those churches. We just moved up there 2 years ago, so we came across the history sort of backwards by finding out about that stuff and then getting interested in that. So
Last summer, because basically the Buddhist church has shut down for the due to the pandemic, but we had a work day at the church, and we discovered there's a family of mink living near the koi pond.
They were doing good.
Yeah, so mink love fish, but we've been keeping an inventory, and inventory has not gone down. So, there's another question. Another question over here.
Just a comment. My understanding is that 10 acres that the Methodist Church was purchased by the Japanese families, that they worked hard to.
Oh, okay.
earn that money
Rather than
rather
being
than
donated. Okay. Okay. Well, thank you. And I did bring copies of my book. I just want to put a little plug in. We had there was a problem with the books were being stored in somebody's garage, and last year when the floods hit, we lost about 200 copies of the book. So I have 18 copies left, and when they're gone, they're gone. So I have them here tonight, and if you're interested, see me after Rebecca's presentation, and I'd be happy to tell it to you. Right?
Sorry,
Yeah.
and I'm the historian for the Loomis Methodist Church, and I just brought 3 copies, but we have like 100 copies of this book. So if anybody's interested, I'd be happy to share those too.
Okay.
Our history of our church at the Loomis Methodist Church, and it states a lot of what you're describing. Who the people were that started it in 1903 and how they did it. A lot of that's in the starting part of it. And some great pictures. So if you're interested,
I was there today.
good. I'm here.
I'm glad I got it right. Sarah's going to introduce the next speaker, but I just have to say, the Standing Guard project happened before my book, and I think, as Rebecca will tell you, the people who went into the internment camps, they did not want to talk about it. They just didn't talk about it. So people of like Gordy's generation, they didn't know this stuff because their parents didn't talk about it. But Rebecca came along, and she opened that door up, and the people started talking, and they were, by the time I came along, they were happy to talk to me.
All right, thank you, David. So, as David mentioned, Rebecca Gregg was instrumental in the Standing Guard project at Sierra College, working with a team of faculty administrators, including Bill Suji, and community advisors such as Ida Otani and Shig and Rose Yokoti. Students collected 38 oral histories, which were published in 2001 when Sierra College Press was created. If any of you have not had a chance to look at this book, it is incredible. We do have copies in the library. You can come and check them out here. Rebecca is Professor Emerita of Photography and serves on the board and curatorial committee for Viewpoint Photographic Arts Center in Sacramento. Rebecca.
Well, I retired, and so I have lost my teacher voice. But I'll try to project. I used to be able to do that, and we'll see. I've had a really good time doing this, what you're about to see. It's not nearly as informative with specifics like David had. In fact, I was taking notes and hoping I could remember some of the things he said. But I think you will enjoy seeing the pictures that I've been taking since we started doing this. But I have a slightly different slant on it than looking at the Japantown. So you will see pictures of Penryn and other places, but I'm going to start us up at Auburn and look at where we are today, because the Japanese influence hasn't at all gone away, it's just gone wider. And in fact, it's very much still with us, and aren't we glad about that? I have to give credit to Deb Sutton, who's sitting back there. She and Lynn Medeiros wrote a whole class for taking oral histories. That's both Deb's and Lynn's training in their graduate work is social history, public history. And we had Randy Snook doing the publishing part. We had students. Here's a student who took the picture in the book of Suda's grocery store with the courthouse up behind and Frank Suda right there. And I think you did someone else too, didn't you, Vaughn? You did several anyway. So she's a star, and there were other students. There were students that produced the work, so what the faculty did was in the background, but I will tell you quite humbly, we had no idea of the ripple effect that this was going to have. And I wrote it in a journal after I'd made friends with Ida Otani, who looked after me when I was I wasn't intending to say any of this part, by the way, but here we go, you know. So I met Ida Otani and Taeko Takahashi and Ted Katada and Shig Yakoti at Sierra College, and I was the youngest person on campus, trying to make friends with people, and Ida really looked after me. Sorry. So it was a wonderful thing for me. Wow, sorry. I had a little notebook and I wrote, when I started teaching photography, I came as something else and I became the photography teacher. Do a document of the Japanese Americans. And I meant photographic document. And then I wrote 25 years later, we did it. So it took a long time, a quarter of a century, to pull the right people together, whether it was students or other faculty who wanted, and administrators. We would not have done this without Bill Suji's help, without Morgan Lynn's help, Kevin Ramirez's help. You know, you have to have those things. We got lucky, we too got a grant. and we sold things. We sold rocks with Standing Guard written on it. And I remember the guy, we had I don't know who said it, but I can still hear him saying it. We were having a little gathering of people, and he was buying a rock for, $25 or something, and he said, I can't believe I've been dynamiting rocks all my life, and now I'm paying $25 for one. It was beyond imaginable experience for me, and I continue to grow and be enriched by it and emotional about it. So I want to take you on a pleasure trip through our county, and I, like David, will often misspeak. I have no idea why I do that, so please correct me if I say something wrong or if you want to teach me something, because I'm always willing to try to fill out my bank of knowledge here. I can do it, and I'll walk and do it. So that's the title, Beyond Japantown. We're going beyond that. And tell me where to punch, so I'm going to have my likewise. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
And so we're going to start up at Auburn instead of driving up. We're going to start down. And because the lights are, can we demo that all? Just a little bit.
They're behind this lady over there.
We have skylights, so
You see pretty well.
Right behind you.
Thank you.
Oh, that's good.
Also say hello.
There we
Kendall.
Hello.
We just met the other day in Penryn, and I happened to see you there. So this is modeled after the image that was in David's book, trying to get the same position. You know, the Japantowns that have lasted best are the ones that are in historic districts, because they've tried to save those buildings, and so this is almost a duplicate of the image that's in the 18 copies that you might get one of tonight. Anyway, there it is. Not much changed. When you look here, that was the 135 Sacramento. That was where the store Sue's was before. And when internment came, they just boarded it up and didn't open it back up again for a very, very long time. And they just left it like it was. David mentioned that what most of us would know as Suda's is now the annex for what was Shanghai. And it's been redone on the inside by a wonderful architect in Auburn, Mike Murphy. But the sign is gone. It's still there. It still looks like that. But it was the Buddhist church and then became Suda's after that. But all of that's pretty much intact. It's there. Now, what I find is where you can really feel the community. And so I'm going to take you to 3 cemeteries, but I didn't want you to get the wrong opinion. I love what you can learn in a cemetery. And so this is the old cemetery in Auburn, and I didn't, I took jillions or several pictures of but in the interest of your comfort, I edited down some, So this is there, and I just chose 3 that spoke to me. Yamasaki's a name I know because they helped us out on the garden at Sierra, and I you'll notice in the upper one there, it's all in Japanese except for the dates, which we can read, and so it tells you something about the age. So that middle one, the death date is 1928, and that fits with the peak years and stuff, fits right in with that you can see the older generation. And then in the bottom one, that's also in that same cemetery, there's 2016 on the left when the husband died, and she is still alive unless somebody just hasn't fixed this, I don't know. So it kind of gives you a flavor of what's going on. Plus you can learn to read a little Japanese because that means mountain. And so once you kind of start to recognize one, you can put them together, and it helps, it makes you go. But this is the most iconic. So a friend of mine said that when they were driving up from San Francisco, they would see the sign and it said, fruit burger. And he was a kid and he said, let's get a fruit burger. But now they've changed that, they put that on a different line. But I think that Ketta's is that part that brings the culture both in food and camaraderie and the things we look forward to, the pies, all that. So now we're coming down the road a little bit. We're going to go to Newcastle. And I chose these two just to capture that Newcastle was once a place that cared about its formal kind of buildings. This is very formal architecture, though small. The columns and that kind of Corinthian filigree that's on there. These are, the bank is, even Wells Fargo just has an ATM now, but it still shows something about the money past of Newcastle. And then the upper left is David's, the illustration that's in the book. And again, I tried to take it kind of from the same angle so you can see how little has changed in the exterior building. The cupolas are still there. It's quite interesting. But what's really changed is that most of the stores, there are artists there, artist studios, several studios, a very good Italian restaurant. But there's the orchard ladder. And when you go inside, and a big one too, when you go inside, that antique store has several wooden orchard ladders in case anybody wants to risk, have a risky life. And this one, there's one of the things you can't read is it says wine shop and dog grooming, and so other businesses are occupying the shed now, or the packing shed. But there were 10 of them, according to David's book. That's a lot of packing sheds, And then I'm back at the cemetery again. I find the Newcastle Cemetery to be one of the most beautiful places to go. I urge you to walk there, to feel the quiet. And you can see the influence. Here's one of the maps, of the inside the cemetery is named Bonsai Lane. And there again is there's a Masuda that you can read, and then Nita's in the far background. There's the Nita's over there. John and Sarah here. So, and this one interested me too. We do a lot of talking about the 442, and you're going to see some other things about the 442. So the one on the left is a veteran, of World War II. So he was in the very famous Go for Broke 442, and the one on the right, the death date is 1942, and he died before going to camp, and because his son John takes over that role. So it doesn't say the month that he died, but you can learn a lot walking around a cemetery. And if you don't learn it, you can at least write it down and go look it up later and still feel good. So I urge you to do that, to go to the cemetery.
See the Matsuda's there too.
Yeah. And Susie, I had a picture that I took out. Susie, can you hear me? I took out the huge Godot one, and because I have lots of pictures of it, it's so beautiful that's in the Newcastle Cemetery. So here's the Hilltop Cafe, there's the Valencia Club, and the comparison photograph, those same guys are riding their motorcycles. I love this this Art Deco kind of design of the building, but it's just a hodgepodge. Look how all these added on things are sort of like Tough Shed came and added on, but originally it was a pretty interesting place, and I think that the sign and everything is served us well, and that is US 40. Howard Mackay's orchard was right where that road is, and so and to the right of it, we'll see another little picture of it. So there we are, and then we turn to go down the one road, that is the Old Town. And I won't say the name of this, the correct name correctly, so I'm just going to tell you it's the JACL building, but now it's privately owned. They sold it, but that little plaque that's above the door is this plaque. And it says that Thomas Masuru Yego, and he died in 1956, he's the co-founder and faithful servant to Placer County JACL. And I think that one of the things you'll appreciate about going around and looking at pictures and looking at places to take pictures is that there's so many plaques. On Suda's Grocery, there's a plaque about that big, and it's wonderful because you can really learn a lot of things about it. And so I want us to put a plaque on the church.
So he must have been the father of Ike Diego?
I guess so, I think so.
Yes, he is a birthday.
Brother.
Gotcha.
So this is the site of the store, but it was one of my favorite pictures. It looks a little bit better on my computer at home than projected this big. But isn't it, it speaks so sadly in some ways of changing times, and yet it also speaks of the domestication of things with the gate. And so this is where the store was, and Godo's was on the left, and then the store, and I didn't do the site where the K&M garage is, but this is the building that's still standing. That was Mikawa's grocery store, and it had other names too, Mikawa's fish market, and it had several other names, but there it is. And then that's the way it looked in 2007 before it was bought to be restored. And so the one previous was the restored one. So you can see that it was needing a little help. And here is Yamamoto's shoe store and beauty shop. It's like both ends of you. Get behind.
And card room.
Oh, and card room. So it's the oldest, Kendall, say this right for me.
The last standing original house of Japantown.
Yeah.
Last standing original house of Japantown.
Yeah.
Right there. So that's looking one side and then looking back. The Ofuro was, according to Cliff Kennedy, was back here. So those buildings were connected. So. And then the other side of the street is the Buddhist church, and it's remarkably unchanged. And I really believe we have to get a plaque on it. That there's not a plaque there, and that's the parsonage. That it was built later. The church used to have a sign on it, according to the photographs. It says 1920, and the church was built around 1930. I mean, the parsonage was built around 1930. This is looking back from the church into, you can see the newer homes, and back after the Yamamoto's beauty shop. It's become newer homes, and you can also see one of the saddest palm trees in the world. But it's still trying, it's still standing.
When we were kids, that's where Chinatown started. Yes.
Oh, that's interesting to know.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Chinatown was down
lower
from
Yeah.
Japantown.
Thank you. Good to have a source, a primary source. Isn't that good? And then I saw this building and this little thing and photographed it because I couldn't figure out what it was. Did a little research. It was the fire hose cart shed. And it was evidently built just before they went to camp, but it's still there and kind of filled with people's printings. But You can see the church, so it's right in the parsonage. It's just down from that. And by the way, the place where, when you look at the book, you'll see that there's a bulletin board, a wooden bulletin board that would have been about right here. And that's where the notification of where to assemble was placed, right in front of the church. And this is, I learned from Gordy Takamoto the other day, Dr. K's dentist office, and it's the newest building after the war, before the upstart, you know, so it was built, so he had a dentist office in there. I too wondered what that building was, because it kind of had the shape of a barrack, but smaller, and so it was a dentist office.
So was that along Penrith Road then?
Yes, that's just the right side. It's between where the school was and the church.
It's right next to the play yard.
Right next to the play yard. I took pictures of the school vacant lot and stuff, but I didn't show them. And then I didn't take pictures of all the sheds that are still there, because they're all something else. You know, there's a storage facility, but they're still standing. There's a boat storage place there behind this. And then the fire department, the volunteer fire department's down this way. But it still has the distinctive look of the fruit shed. And the railroad track is just right there, so convenient, you know, that the way it is at Blue Goose. So at the end of my photographing that day, I pulled out, and I thought, oh my gosh. So I pulled back in. That's Mount Diablo. And so if you take yourself back in time, you can imagine how beautiful. You know, it was a lot of work to be an orchard farmer, I'm sure, but it was a beautiful place to be, you know. And so this is just sunset, and it's smog set a little bit, but
Looking down Penrith.
looking down Penrith Road. And so going on down the road, you turn on Boyington like you're going to get on the freeway, and the Buddhist church is off. The woman that asked, it's only been with us 2 years. Thank you for moving here. That we like it. So this is a long driveway that goes down there, and I liked the way they kept a kind of Asian flavor to that. This side that's on the left is on the road. If you're not careful when you take this picture, you'll have the Union 76 thing right at the top of that. And I had to get a funny position to get that thing out of there. But anyway, it's right behind that. The church bell, 1902, and there's the koi that the mink haven't gotten. I took pictures, but didn't include them of the garden. You know, they have a lovely little koi pond, and some of the black pines are leaning out and propped up. It's so sweet, the care that's taken. So you'll enjoy it if you go there. This is a very Asian thing to do. I used to teach some design and would tell people, don't write things down like that. It's so hard to read them. You have to put every letter. It's so difficult. Don't do that. But if you're trained, if your language writes things down, you know, and reads that way, then that's what you would design this rock. And so it makes perfect sense when you think about how Japanese, you know, when you think about the headstones that we just saw, how they were done. So, but it's a little hard for us to put it together, I think. But still, it's a lovely rock. It's really big, donated by the Yamasaki family. And I know that because there's a little plaque there. Okay, so you got to get a plaque on that church. So here we are. This is one of my favorite pictures because I saw that guy coming and I thought, okay, I'm waiting for that guy. You can see some changes, but the sign is still there, so I made a little list. On the right-hand side, there were trees then, and notice that the car, that's the spare tire on the back of the car, so they're pulled in straight, but we've lost that to another lane of traffic. You know? So we've lost the last 2 steps, and you can't park there anymore. You know, that became a lane. So, but everything else is pretty nice, I think, in terms of the caping of that, yeah.
Who owns that building?
I don't know.
And is there an ordinance that prevents somebody from destroying that sign? I worry so much. I've been here 50 years now, and that sign is so prominent. I'd hate to see anybody buy that store and then paint it over.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know the answer, to the first one. Does anybody know who owns that?
I think the entity that owns it, they own, Grant's East Row is, and the whole
kind
They own it all.
Yeah, so, the whole like, corners there, like what someday will be a roundabout. But, oh, don't worry. But, anyway, but I think they have let's write them a letter, you know, tell them. Because I agree, that sign really speaks to it. And the brickwork, you know, the brickwork on that building, because those bricks were probably made in Lincoln, don't you imagine? Yeah. And, I think it's just beautiful, so.
Didn't there used to be like a way back when, like a little theater in there?
I heard that. So, there's Gordy back there, so long, farewell. Gregg.
Did anybody, oh yeah, I'm sure a lot of people, when they took the siding off, you could see the old boards. That was kind of neat at one time. I don't know if the siding's back on or not. But the siding on, I don't know what street runs.
Yeah.
But they took the siding off for repairs maybe, but it showed the old boards behind that.
Everybody kept hitting the building.
Yeah, poor Joanne.
Yeah, they had to fix it. So, I didn't take a picture of there were some wonderful granite benches, and this is one of the signs that's there, another plaque. You know, but it's tiny, it's a little bitty. Joanne and Gordy are here. So, in 1945, that's after. And then also, obviously, the repurposing of Blue Goose to be an event center and all the other things that you can see in the Blue. I chose the Blue Goose over High Hand in some ways because I love High Hand and I love what they've done creatively and the food and the ambiance and taking people from out of town there, you know. And but Blue Goose still is doing letting us feel our past in terms of. All of the oranges, the mandarins there, and avocados. We're not roasting those here. But this connects the High Hand and Blue Goose to the importance of the trains. They are right there. Right there. And then if you've gotten as far as Blue Goose, you've already passed Oro High School and their Japanese garden. So that is the garden on the right-hand side, or one view of it, and then this close-up picture, which I know you can't read, but if you go here, you have all these names of the people who donated and worked worked to see this. It's a very lovely Japanese garden, and I didn't have to go into the office and ask for permission or anything like that. I just went over there and did it. So I think you could go and see. It's a very lovely garden. And
Who cares for it? Who cares for it? Who keeps it up?
I don't know, because it's well tended. Anybody know who cares for the garden?
I believe the school district's doing it. A lot of people here contributed to put it together.
Yeah, I mean, this is only just a few of those, and it's very well done. So this is Sierra College, and we were the same people who did the garden, who did the book, helped build the garden, and we got Tiger brought rocks down from, way up the hill, way up the hill. But we're building another building back here. And so that gate was built in North San Juan using Japanese technique. And this says standing guard on that rock that's covered up. But don't go over there right now because the campus is all torn up. I can't find my way. I worked there 48 years. I can hardly find my way around. But it will be back to being beautiful again. It's going to take a little while. But in the meantime, this is the Methodist Church that was spoken of already. And so there's the main sanctuary, and the modern one is on the left. And just to the right of this is a wonderful Japanese garden that is that has all kinds of little signage for different lighting and stuff that was donated by people. So it really helps you to feel the community when you go there. And it's another place that they welcome you just to sit and be quiet, you know, or admire or take ideas home. In the back of the sanctuary is this mural with an explanation of what each of those things, it's a mural sculpture, so it's wooden sculpture, and this one has dates, like this is 2008, which was one of their historic things. This is Barb Wire, you know, that's a married couple, Bob and Barb. You know? That wreath of barbed wire there is the internment. So it is recording the history. And then to the opposite side,
Rebecca,
what?
Alan Takagishi that put that together is here somewhere.
Yeah, it's right there.
Now, for some reason, so the top picture on the right is inside the sanctuary, and it's just a beautiful piece that's large with the cranes folded, and it just impressed me of how the church still incorporates in the main sanctuary. This says Issei Chapel, but that's not a real door. It's split bamboo that's over the door. How clever! I wrote that idea down when I saw that. And there's the original Issei church. There's a Nisei Fellowship Hall to the right of that, but in the book, there is Japantown. There's a tree right here that they had to plant a new one for, but it's almost the same view. It's just really remarkable how well it's been maintained. I'm a little off here. So this is Sasaki Park. We're in Rockland now, coming on down. And Sasaki Park, just before that, was the Ueda farm, and it was called Southside Ranch. So the farm is no longer, it's the houses in the background, but the road is part of the way the culture is still being affected because it's named for the ranch. And this is a hill, that's a tower up there, and their property went all the way up the hill in each of those farms. And then coming down from that, so you can see Ueda, Sasaki, and Hori. So Mr. Hori in 1920 chiseled his name on that rock. Yeah. And the rock is as tall as I am.
What park is that in?
That's not in a park.
Oh, how would I find it?
You'd have to come to
I
my
have to
house.
come talk to you.
Yeah. It's up a private road, but if you really wanted to see it, I could tell you where it is. And then the thing on the right, so this is Mr. Hori, and he also passed away before. He didn't go to camp, but his son was named with a J, and he became the head of the family and went to camp. So this is downtown Rockland, where the railroad and in Front Street where St. Mary's is, all that new orchard has been installed there, and this is the plat of that right there. So it's wonderful at all seasons to go. This was at the very first of spring. You can see the few blooms, but and there's really easy parking there. So if you want to go, hear a few bees buzz around you and stuff, go there. You know. Rockland Cemetery, and again, learning as you go. This before I made the connection of things, I went to this cemetery, and the upper right has the most beautiful inscription. It has a haiku there. I'll read it to you because I know you can't read it. Coolness, so it's a little short poem, right? Coolness of autumn, together with my wife, waiting, following.
I'll just mention, the library on the back wall is the Loomis Historical Societies, and there's an oral history of Benji Takahashi back in there.
And now we're in Roseville. And this is George Godot Park. Susie Godot is right back there. And there at the park, there is a wonderful modern plaque that tells you about George's life and his very extensive engagement with parks. And he taught at the college. He was basketball and athletic director. He was very athletic. He was a star athlete, actually. And here's the address and all if you want. It's a really lovely park, but there we go, reaching into the community again. And then go there on a weekend is my suggestion. So it's a little difficult. I was there kind of at the wrong time of day, but we don't get clouds every day, and I wanted some clouds. So that's the statue of the 442 liberating the Texas Battalion. They lost more men trying to liberate this stranded and isolated battalion than was in the battalion. But it is one of the heroic acts of the 442. And this is a whole series of plaques all along here. Standing Guard folks are on this one, I think. But this lists all of the people from Placer County who were in the 442.
Did they lose like 600?
Something like that, yeah. It was just phenomenal.
Yeah.
Is that in, what location is that in Roseville?
That's in Roseville.
Up by the Justice Center?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
And in fact, that sign that you saw is right there, you know, that's the Go for Broke is what the 442 nickname or motto was, and so you'll see that sign there. And then we're at the last slides here. This is Otto's ranch or orchard. They're on Eureka, kind of, you know, and you can see a gated community across the way. So you have to be alert. It's a pretty busy road. You have to be alert when you leave there. Don't eat too much before you leave. But it's just an absolutely throwback in time. It's a wonderful place, wonderful family, great. You know, starter plants for your tomatoes and all the things that they are telling you there that they have. But this is Chris, whose grandparents were the ones who started the farm, and Helen, her mother is still alive. She's 106. Wow. And when I introduced myself and said that I was taking pictures for this project, she took me into this shed and showed me this writing. And the writing says May 24, 1942, and that is the leave day. That's, you know, and it was written originally and it hasn't been changed since then.
What was the date?
May 24. It was the day that they had to be taken to Arboga. So there isn't an ending slide. That's the place to end. Except I want to tell you one other thing, or encourage you. I took all these pictures with my cell phone, which I just want to call my pocket phone, you know, and it's just such a wonderful tool. So I want to encourage you to arm yourself with your phone seriously and to take pictures of your street, your neighborhood, you know, what things look like when you see the for sale sign go up on an empty lot. Take the picture of it, I'm doing Aguilar Road right now because, whoa, have things changed there, you know? So really make history with your camera, because all of the pictures that we take become historically interesting and important with the passage of time. So I would urge you to become camera historians. Thank you very much.